Hey everyone, so today I'm going to talk about the IOTAVX SA3 and the PA3. Now I'm not going to review it, so if you're here to hear me talk about how it sounds, sorry to disappoint you. I took a look at Sean's review at Zero Fidelity, and seriously, there's no point for me to repeat what he said. Just go watch his video on the IOTAVX SA3 and you will know exactly how it sounds. Now, one thing I have to give it to Sean is that he's very good at describing how things sound, and he's very accurate. So I figure let's just use the time to talk about what I learned from using this integrated amp, and should you buy it? So there are two reasons why I decided to get my hands on a few entry-level integrated amp recently. First, I get this question frequently. Please recommend me what amp to buy for my ELAC 6.2, my KEF LS50, and so forth. For me, to recommend what I think is worth your time, I should actually have used it. Second, it's due to an interesting point people have brought up to me. What good is your review to me when you plug a $500 speaker to a $10,000 front end? Get yourself a $500 front end and then the review is relevant. I do understand why people would want me to get something more in the same class as the speakers I'm reviewing. $500 speaker, maybe $500 to $1,000 integrated amp. So yeah, okay, fine. I got a few to test. Now, if you met someone who tells you that a specific integrated amp, like integrated amp A, is the best you can buy under $1,000, I guess some of you are looking for that, right? The best $1,000 integrated amp, the best $500 integrated amp you can buy. I'll tell you right now, don't believe that guy. There is no best. Each well-reviewed integrated amp has its strength and weakness, and it's just a question if it's to your taste or not. So I got my hands on the Cambridge 650A, the Atoll 30, the Sprout 100, the Micromega IA60, the Arcam Solo, and this IOTAVX SA3, all below $1,000 Canadian. Most of these amps have good reviews, but they all sound different. And to choose which one is right for you, you need to know what is unique about each amp, because they all image relatively well, if you think about it. Okay, they all have decent soundstage, they all have decent speed, decent clarity, and so forth. Sure, one might have, let's say, more depth in the soundstage, for example, but it doesn't really matter because in the grand scheme of things, the other ones are not that far behind. So given what I just said, then why should you choose the IOTAVX SA3 if overall each one of them perform plus or minus the same? So the IOTAVX SA3 is a very special integrated amp, and I mean it in a positive way. And that is because out of all the amps I've tried here, it's the only one that is very neutral sounding. Neutral sounding. It's a very deep subject, and you know what? Feel free to comment what you think neutral sounding means in the comment section. I have a friend who owns a lot of vintage gear, whom I'll call Mr. Vintage from now, okay? He had to help me with this review because he's one of my audiophile friends who values neutrality above all in the system. Also, I don't know anything about vintage gear, so his experience was valuable to me because the SA3 has a touch of vintage sound. Now, my vintage friend has been into stereo even before I was born, and he told me, if you look at gears from the 70s, it's all about neutrality. Then 80s came and people's taste changed. You start having equalizer, loudness control. And then in the 90s, people went back to neutrality. But stereo gear in the 90s to achieve neutrality was very expensive. My vintage friend told me he spent a lot of money trying to achieve neutrality, that at the time, just his CD transport, not even the CD player, just the transport was $6,000. $6,000 during that time is a lot of money. Today, with the advance in technology, we can achieve neutrality at way less cost. Oh, by the way, interestingly, today we're back to fancy equalizer, namely DSP. So back to the IOTAVX, okay? This is where it's worth your attention. There's a hint of 70s Sunsweet neutrality in it. So my vintage friend knows this because he had all those old Sunsweet before. Well, he still has a few now. Although the SA3 has maybe the vintage sound, it is not old sounding. It is more refined compared to vintage gear, because it is, after all, a more modern design. That's why there's a certain musicality with the IOTAVX I don't find compared to all the other integrated amps I have here. It's saying a lot when my vintage friend even suggests, for those of you who are looking for a Sansui 1000, for example, it is better to get the IOTAVX, because if you buy an old Sansui, you still need to recap the unit and with all said and done, an old Sansui is way more expensive than this IOTA. Now, people who usually buy Sansui are looking for that neutrality, and this SA3 does have that neutral signature that Sansui owners are searching for. So why should I care about neutrality? Let's talk about it, okay? Let me define two characteristics I notice in a neutral system. Of course, there are more, and this is just my experience, and I'm simplifying it. First, in terms of tone, nothing is tilted up and down. Treble is not sharp, so the highs don't stand out. Bass is not overly powerful, just enough and not exaggerated. So when you listen to a neutral system, no instrument should jump out. Nothing should be emphasized. You know when people say, wow, the bass is crazy in that system and it's amazing. Now, one danger with that is that the system might sound good, but it's not neutral sounding. Tuning a system to sound neutral is important, because if you want a piano to sound like a piano, then your system should be neutral. If you start tilting up the top, and although some instruments will stand out more, hence the illusion that the system is very detailed, vocals might be tilted up too. That's why I once said, if you have a reference track of a singer who you know recorded the song, let's say when she was in her 30s, on a neutral system, she should sound like a 30-year-old singer and not a 25-year-old singer. Okay, no, I'm not asking you to guess the age of a singer, but you should have your reference track. So if you know this artist sound like this when she's in her 30s, and you heard it in a concert, when you play on a neutral system, it should sound like she's in her 30s. Vocal, for example, the top end is tilted up. So I do find singers to sound a bit younger when I listen to vocals. Now, back to a piano should sound like a piano. So you can say, but I can tell I'm listening to a piano. What's the big deal if it's tilted up? Well, any system you can identify piano when you hear it. But the strength of a neutral system is when the musical passage gets complicated. When 10 instruments are going at the same time, you're still able to identify the faint, let's say, cello playing at the background 3 meters away from the singer. With a non-neutral system, you can hear it, but not always identify it. Was that a cello, or was that somebody walking across the stage, or somebody making noise at the background? With a neutral system, you can clearly identify it. You know the saying, when you're working on multiple tasks and everything is emergency, nothing is an emergency. Many of the systems I listen to today have that characteristic. Every single instrument is fighting for center stage. But when everything is fighting for attention, nothing is getting my attention. So another problem with a system that is not neutral, let's take a system with exaggerated powerful bass, for example. Now, my audiophile friends, okay, there's a group of them, who value neutrality once told me, the bass should be part of the music and not the music. Now that's a bit deep here. Music should be a harmonious sphere, okay? The problem when part of the music gets exaggerated is like having a tumor on the sphere. Every time the bass hits, it pulls you out of the music. Ideally, nothing should catch your attention, because as I mentioned before, everything should be part of the music and not the music. You see, out of all the integrated amp I tried, the bass is actually the less pronounced on the SA3. Now, this is a gutsy move by IOTAVX, in my opinion, because I remember when I first started my audio journey, I wanted bass and extreme detail high. If you look at the Sprout 100, for example, they know what they're targeting. They know who they're targeting. And that's why there's bass boost on that integrated amp. I think it's very smart. The toe I have here also has very strong bass, not the IOTAVX. The bass is not weak, but it's not strong. So what is the advantage of having less pronounced bass? As I always say, everything in the audio world is a compromise. So the IOTAVX having the least attention-grabbing bass is the most holographic. All the instruments really spaces out easily because it's not drowned out by the bass. Also, the IOTAVX is the most balanced sounding amp out of all the amps. I had a subscriber drop by a few weeks ago, and we did an ABC test. IOTAVX versus ATO versus Sprout 100. And I have to say, if you do a quick A/B test like this, the ATO and the Sprout will impress you more. The IOTAVX will not impress you in a quick demo. However, at the end of that specific audition session, we end up spending the most time listening to the IOTAVX. Now, the subscriber ended up leaving saying, man, the hype with the IOTAVX is real. Now, although I'm not somebody who is into neutral sounding system, I personally like color systems. Like, I absolutely get it. Like neutral system, I get it. In fact, I really get it now, especially after owning the Quad 2905. Guess I'll make a video another day on it, why the Quad 2905 is an amazing neutral speaker. Another way to stress the strength of the IOTAVX, and I'm going to use exaggeration here, okay? The difference between IOTAVX compared to ultra high-end integrated systems is that in a high-end system, if we place a soundtrack with 10 items dropping on the floor, we can hear all 10 items and differentiate them. Okay, that's a needle dropping, that's a nail dropping, that's a pen dropping. Yes, I'm exaggerating. Now, with a vintage neutral sound suite, you can pick out about 6 items. With the IOTAVX, it would be 6+. So, what can the SA3 do better? Now, I do wish it was a bit smoother, but I don't know if it's fair for me to ask that, because compared to the other amps I have here, it's okay. Just that I'm used to my own system and that's really smooth. Okay, next, let's talk about the PA3 power amp. So what about adding the PA3 power amp? I find it does more than just increase the power from 45 watts to 100 watts. It actually changes the sound. Bass is increased by maybe 20%. Now, and that affects the neutrality of the system. So my vintage friend, who has the hearing of a bat, does not like the change. Having said that, me and the subscriber who dropped by were like, yeah, now we're talking the extra bass and the better control bass raised the fun factor to the next level for us. Oh, by the way, I was using the SA3 mostly with the ELAC, the DB 6.2, and the KEF LS50, as well as the Klipsch RP600M and the Wafdell D225. And it works well with all those speakers. And that's the advantage of having a neutral integrated amp. The amp pairs with everything, man. Everything you throw at it, it works well. So if you're wondering how this combo compares to the higher end gear, because once I brought out the PA3, I start comparing to the higher end gears. And I pit it against my Paphos Logos. And we used the Focal 936V. The Logos, I think, was about 4,000 new. Yeah, it's around there. And it was definitely smoother than the IOTAVX combo. Now, although the Paphos did outclass the IOTAVX, the IOTA had better speed with bass. Now, I would say if anyone came to listen to my Focals 936 with the IOTAVX, they would find it totally acceptable. I actually did spend the rest of my time with the IOTAVX combo after the subscriber left. Now, usually I change gear after an audition, but with the IOTAVX, I was okay to leave it until I had to change it, as opposed to I want to change it. So this is my take on the IOTAVX. I know it's not a review. I figure, I'll just talk about it. Now, it's special because at this price point, companies don't usually aim for neutrality. Other companies are more like, oh man, how much explosion we can pack into the amp, how much bass, and stuff like that. Now, I spoke to Ian, who's the owner, after I finished drafting my review, and I was really happy that he confirmed what I wanted to say. So, it took him 4 years to develop this amp, and he was aiming for neutrality and vintage musicality. And in my opinion, he did it, and for an insane, crazy price of $500 US. Now, the best part about this system is that if you have, it has a trial period, and you can return it if you don't like it. Now, who should buy this? So, 3 groups of people, okay? If you're in the first group of people who email me with a list of 5 speakers asking me which one you should buy, and the speakers in the list are all the current most talked about speaker, then I would say the IOTAVX is not for you yet. Go get the ATO 30 or the Sprout 100. Now, if you're in the group where you send me a list of 5 speakers and all 5 speakers have similar sound characteristic, then I say you can start considering the IOTAVX. because by looking at your list, it tells me at least that you are aware what kind of sound you like and you're not a beginner. Finally, if you're in a group where you're able to send me an email breaking down the characteristic of an amp in a well-structured essay, and yes, I've gotten those emails, then you can seriously consider this integrated amp. I think in everybody's audio journey, you should at least try at one point a neutral system. It does take a bit of getting used to, right? It's like, you know, drinking Coca-Cola every day, and then suddenly I'm going to ask you to drink mineral water for it. Takes a bit of adjustment, a transition period. But I think, you know, everybody should at least give that a try. All right, guys. So I think that's about it then. And by the way, before that subscriber left, he did suggest maybe I should use this as my reference amp going forward. Because, you know, when you test equipment, you want your equipment to be neutral. All right, guys, till next time.